Welcome to this explainer. Have you ever looked at a standard map of the United States, the exact one that was taped to every classroom chalkboard when we were kids, and just assumed you were getting the whole, unvarnished truth? We implicitly rely on these flat, two-dimensional maps to build our understanding of the world, our sense of scale, and even our own internal compass. But what if I told you that those colorful, neatly defined borders are actually hiding some truly mind-bending geographic anomalies? Today, we're going to theoretically tear up that standard map and look at the actual data beneath it. So get ready, because the geography you thought you knew is about to get completely flipped on its head.
So think you know the US map? Really ask yourself. We all have this built-in mental model of the country, right? We picture the East Coast, the West Coast, the flat middle, the frozen North, and the sunny South. It feels set in stone, almost like this unquestionable geographic law. But the truth hidden in the actual data is far stranger, far more extreme, and honestly a whole lot more fascinating than the basic shapes we've all memorized. We are about to shatter some of your deepest geographic assumptions piece by exploring the incredible reality of the terrain.
Okay, let's dive straight into this. Section 1. Shattering Geographic Extremes.
134 degrees Fahrenheit. Just let that staggering figure sink in for a second. Before we even get to strange borders or compass tricks, we have to look at sheer physical extremes. We're not just talking about a really hot summer day where the asphalt kind of shimmers. This is the temperature recorded in Death Valley, California. And it's not just a state record or even a national record. According to the data, 134 degrees is the hottest air ever recorded on planet Earth. Right there, inside the borders of the US, exists a literal furnace, a pocket of geography that holds the absolute extreme limit for atmospheric heat anywhere on the globe.
And that brings us to an astonishing contrast of scale, moving from searing heat to just pure, vast emptiness. On one hand, Alaska is an absolute behemoth of a state. It makes up roughly 20% of the entire U.S. territory. Imagine that 1/5 of the nation's entire landmass is consolidated into just this one state. Yet less than 1% of the total U.S. population actually lives there. The sheer emptiness, the thousands of miles of completely untouched wilderness, and the massive scale of that disparity between physical size and human footprint, it just completely defies how we normally think about state proportions. It's a true geographic titan, operating completely on its own terms.
Moving right along to Section 2. Bending the compass. Let's look at some directional illusions. We've tackled scale, but now we're going to completely break your internal compass. If I were to ask you to point to the southernmost tip of the United States, your brain probably immediately jumps to the Florida Keys, right? People buy the t-shirts, they take the photos at the buoy. Or if you're thinking a bit further outside the contiguous states, maybe you'd confidently guess Hawaii. It makes total logical sense based on the map we all share in our minds. But the data tells us that assumption is entirely, completely incorrect. Here is the actual reality. The true southernmost point of the USA actually belongs to American Samoa. You see, because our standard maps are constantly cropping out territories or shoving them into little inset boxes that warp their actual geographic location, we just completely forget the true, sprawling reach of the country's borders. American Samoa holds the definitive title for the southernmost point, stretching our national compass incredibly far beyond the beaches of Florida or the islands of Hawaii. Now, if you thought that Southern Anomaly was weird, consider Alaska's directional dominance. We've already established its massive size, so naturally, it's the most northern state. Makes perfect sense. And stretching way out into the Pacific Ocean, it easily claims the title of the most western state. But here is the real mind-bender. Alaska is also the most eastern state in the US. Literally all at the exact same time. Wait, no way, right? How is it physically possible for a single landmass to be the furthest west and the furthest east simultaneously? So, the crucial point here is the 180th meridian. This is the invisible line of longitude that dictates our global hemispheres. The Aleutian Islands of Alaska stretch out so incredibly far across the ocean that they actually cross right over the 180th meridian. By doing so, a part of Alaska officially crosses the line and sits perfectly in the eastern hemisphere. Because of this brilliant cartographic technicality, Alaska practically folds the map in on itself, dominating 3 out of the 4 major compass directions completely by itself. Which brings us to Section 3, bizarre U.S. borders and some really strange lines.
When humans try to draw lines over natural geography, the results are sometimes completely illogical.
Take Hawaii, for instance. If you look at the lower 48 states, especially out west, you see the heavy hand of cartographers drawing these perfectly straight lines with rulers. You get perfect rectangles, rigid edges, and strict grids defining states like Colorado or Wyoming. But Hawaii is completely unique. It is the only state in the Union whose borders do not possess a single straight line. And why is that? Because its borders are entirely dictated by the natural, rugged edge of the volcanic islands meeting the Pacific Ocean. It's a purely natural border in a country filled with highly artificial ones.
Then we have these quirks of naming and political geography that just cause endless confusion. Take the city of Washington, our nation's capital over on the East Coast, versus Washington State, way out in the Pacific Northwest. By state count and geographic reality, the city of Washington is entirely separate from Washington State. They share a name, sure, and they share space on the national map, but physically and politically, there are literally thousands of miles between them. It's just a classic example of how human naming conventions unnecessarily complicate our everyday geographic understanding.
Now, this next border anomaly is like a closely guarded geographic secret hiding way up in Minnesota. There is a tiny part of the state that is completely, physically separated from the rest of Minnesota by a vast lake. Imagine living up there. If you are standing in this isolated piece of the state, you are entirely surrounded by Canada. You literally have to grab your passport, leave the United States, cross into a foreign country, and drive back down, or travel all the way over the water of the lake just to get back to the rest of your own home state. It is a surreal border glitch hiding right in plain sight.
And speaking of isolation, consider the case of Nebraska. We often talk about being landlocked, which just means a state doesn't touch the ocean. But Nebraska, it takes this concept to an absolute extreme. It is the only state that is triple landlocked. That means you would have to travel across 3 completely distinct state borders in any given direction just to reach the coast. Furthermore, by state count, it is equally distant from all oceans. It sits in a state of absolute, perfect geographic isolation, right in the dead center of the country's landmass. It's essentially the ultimate geographic anchor of the interior.
Finally, we've got Section 4, Mountains of Deception. Let's see what happens when you change the baseline. We've seen how lines and directions can be deceiving, but how about changing our literal baseline? Now, what's really interesting about this fact is the profound shift in perspective it offers. If we compare Mount Mauna Kea in Hawaii to Mount Everest, using our standard metric, above sea level, Mauna Kea sits at 13,800 feet. It's very tall, absolutely, but seemingly nowhere near Everest. But wait, if you measure the height of the mountain from its actual physical base at the bottom of the ocean floor, all the way up through the water to its peak, Mauna Kea is actually taller than Mount Everest's height above sea level. The ocean has simply been acting as a massive blanket, hiding the true staggering scale of this mountain. The reality of which mountain is actually taller completely flips depending entirely on where you decide to put the starting line. Which leaves us with one final profound question. From Alaska magically bending the compass across global hemispheres, to extreme record-breaking temperatures in Death Valley, to hidden border glitches in Minnesota and massive mountains concealed by the sea, these geographic mind-benders prove that the standard map is just one very limited way of looking at things. How much of our reality, in geography and beyond, is just a matter of where we start measuring from? Think about that the next time you look at a map. Keep challenging those baked-in assumptions, and keep exploring the fascinating data that actually shapes our world.